Hey, it's Heather. So today's episode, well, it's quite the doozy of an episode, if I do say so myself. We're talking about figuring out who the heck you are after you've recovered from childhood trauma. Now, in all honesty, my answer to today's listener, it got bigger than me. I ended up with several journal prompts that I knew would be hard for all of you to keep track of and take notes on, so I turned them into a PDF for all of you. You're going to be able to find a link for that in the show notes, and it might be a good idea to grab it before you listen in so you can take notes and follow along as you're listening. It became a masterclass in answering the question, who are you now? And as with anything this big, just a reminder that Tuesday groups open for all of you to also explore topics like this in the company and support of others. The link for that is also in the show notes. Okay, on to the masterclass that is Mayhem this week.
Today on Mother Mayhem.
Part of finding your true self is going to mean letting go of that need to always feel safe. It's going to mean connecting to the things that have likely felt too vulnerable to connect to in the past. Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, the narcissistic abuse recovery podcast for daughters. I'm your host, Heather Gray, and today we are tackling a really vulnerable part of the healing journey, and that's what comes after a good chunk of the healing. Who are we after we heal? How do we get to know who healing has led us to become? We've talked a lot about dysregulation on the show, and we know a lot about trauma brain, and we know now how to access wise mind. But what does doing the work look like after the immediate trauma part of it all is largely processed? Now, today you're going to meet Courtney, and that's her real name. She wanted me to be able to talk to her directly so she could more easily integrate everything that I say. Now, that word I just used, integrate, I used it deliberately for all of you and for Courtney because that's what I believe her struggle is. You'll hear from her in her letter that she has done a lot of work. She has healed from a lot. She's no longer moving through the world from a place of her trauma, but she also isn't really moving through the world fully as herself yet either. She speaks of this struggle and the tension so eloquently and so powerfully. I really think you're going to get it. Then, on the other side, I'm going to help her understand herself just a bit more. Hi, Heather. I'm Courtney, and if you use my letter in your podcast, please use my real name because I think it's important that I hear you directly talking to me. Heather, I'm missing something. I can't seem to find my blind spots or where I'm disconnecting, but I can tell I'm misfiring, even though I'm working so hard to get it right this time. I've been listening to your show since close to the beginning. I remember when I found it, you only had about 14 episodes or so, and it felt like everything I needed to get my life on track as you walked us through all of the hard parts. I knew I really needed your relationships episodes. My picker has always just been awful. I'm 31 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been waiting on a man, trying to fix a man, or trying to get a man. When I first started dating, I dated as you told us we often do. I dated men who mimicked the ways my parents treated me. My mom isn't narcissistic. She's a borderline, and life with her was like being on the world's worst roller coaster imaginable. She and my dad live several states away now, and I am low contact with both of them, and that does seem to work. I don't get too much pushback from either of them on that either. I journaled so much as you have done podcasts on relationships and on relationship dynamics. When I heard episode 34 about choosing wisely, I knew I was in yet another relationship where I hadn't chosen wisely. He wasn't a project. He didn't mistreat me. He was a good guy, but I didn't love him. I felt safe with him. And for a while, maybe I convinced myself that that was love at the time. In any case, after hearing what you had had to say, doing it all intentionally, I ended that relationship and I've worked really hard to follow that blueprint. I have my list, Heather, and she is a thing of beauty. I love that. Courtney, thank you so much for telling me. I give that advice all the time, and I always wonder if anybody listens to me on it. I carry it with me in my phone, but I have a physical copy too. Well, now you're just trying to be student of the week, and I see that perfectionism is still a little bit on you, my friend. I worked really hard to date differently, and I thought I got it right. After a few misses, I met a guy. Our first date was in the middle of June, and we actually dated like normal people. Heather, no love bombing, no drama. We had enough in common to connect us and enough differences that we were able to add new things to each other's lives, and all of our friends seemed to connect really well too. He'd been to therapy himself because his dad had disconnected after his parents' divorce. It felt like we connected in really important ways. I had the most lovely summer romance, but it ended at the end of August. Stand up guy that he is, he even did it in person. He told me that he was looking for more in a relationship. He felt like after 2 months, he should know me more and that we should have a deeper connection, but that it seemed like I didn't know myself very well. He didn't like that I was so agreeable and went along with everything because he could never tell if I was actually having a good time or just telling him I was having a good time. He was glad we never fought, but he wanted to be with someone who wasn't afraid to feel everything, the highs, the lows. He felt like I played it safe. He mentioned that he wanted to date a whole person, and sometimes he felt like he was dating a very polite, kind box of a person. Whew, Courtney, that must have been a lot to hear. He was looking for more of a connection and to know the woman he was with better. Heather, and ladies, if you're listening, don't go jumping to my defense. Oh, that polite box of a person comment, Courtney. Jumping a little bit to your defense, child. His comments were dead on. He was absolutely right. I've worked so hard to heal, to get off the ride of my childhood, that I do think I have become a bit of a right lane driver in my own life. That felt true to me when he said it. And because he was so kind when he said it, I was able to hear it. Gosh, Courtney, you've done a lot of work. It's so clear to be able to sit in a hard conversation like that, take that in, and realize that this was an opportunity for you. Whew, I'm so proud of you. Heather, I know who I was after my childhood. I can tell you how I went through a phase of boundary pushing and living more on the edge. I then swung the pendulum and became more of a people pleaser and perfectionist. But I have done the work. I thought I found my center, but I think I just found safe. Heather, how do we learn who we are after trauma? How do we find our actual personalities? I think one thing I learned from this is that I am good at connecting with my own feelings when I'm alone. But when I'm with others, I interact with those people from my head and not my heart. I move with kindness, but everyone ends up feeling like I'm a polite acquaintance to them. I'm not sure where people find their expression, their ability to say what they mean and mean what they say, and to share what they think. How do they start to feel safe with themselves, even when they're with other people? I can tell you what I like to do, what I like to eat, what makes me laugh out loud, what makes me mad, what makes me sad, and a whole bunch of other things. I can list those things, but I can't show you those things. I can't express them without sounding like I'm somehow in a job interview. This is the work I have committed to do next, but I have no idea what this is supposed to look like or what it is I'm actually supposed to do. I have a feeling that I can't journal my way into whatever new existence I'm supposed to be in. I have to show up for it and I have to be her. I just don't know how or who she is. I appreciate your help and until you tell me what to do otherwise, I'll have my notebook as I listen to take notes. Thanks, Courtney. All right, Courtney, careful what you wish for, sister, because you are going to need that notebook, but just grab that PDF instead. Courtney. All right, here we go, sister. It's really nice to meet you. Let me first say that. And I really like your idea to have me use your real name so that you can hear and absorb me as I'm talking to you. I have so much respect for the way you have thought all of this through and the way you have owned where you are in your journey without beating yourself up. It's just an incredible sign of how much work you've done. And I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you, Courtney. And we're going to get you through this next part. First, though, before we rush into the whole fixing you part of this conversation and the what to do about this part of the conversation, can I just sit with you for a second and tell you that I'm really sorry that it didn't work out for you with that guy? 2 months is significant for a lot of people, especially when they haven't connected in a really long time. It's enough time to finally think it might be your turn to start getting your hopes up and to connect to the idea of what it might be able to be like to actually connect with someone in a healthy way. And it is disappointing when it doesn't work out. And I'm sorry that you're living in that part now. That part hurts. And it makes sense to me why you feel stuck. You've pulled back so many layers of your onion already and so many daughters. You have likely done this largely on your own. And I think where you might be finding yourself right now is a little bit daunting and intimidating. And I can almost hear you and others who are in the same spot with you saying, wait, Heather, there's more? Please don't tell me there's more. I actually thought I was close to being done. This part must sound so incredibly intimidating for all of you. And you might even feel the urge to run a little bit from it. But if you can just hang tight with me, I think we've got you. One of the hardest things after trauma is learning to separate what you might be calling your coping self from your true self. Often, for you daughters of narcissistic and emotionally limited moms, your true selves ended up getting buried. They were buried under years of these adaptive behaviors that were intended to keep you safe. It's the people pleasing, the perfectionism, the staying in the right lane of your life, as you referred to it. I really was moved too by that description, Courtney. I might be stealing it. More than likely, though, your true selves never got to fully develop because the development of your true self ended up getting stunted once all of the abuse began. You couldn't ever develop a true self in the first place because of everything that you were living through your coping self. So your coping self ended up becoming the only self you knew. Now, when you're letting go of that coping self, you're left looking for who you are now. So, of course, it's confusing. And it is a lot. Finding out who you are outside of your coping self is going to mean exploring what it feels like to really be fully present, both when you're by yourself and when you're with other people. And as you've recognized, it likely is going to start with journaling. In fact, it's going to for you and everyone listening, but we know all of you can't just journal yourselves into this new existence. You're also going to have to show up for it in real time. And if we're going to get down to brass tacks together, here's what we know. Your experiences of trauma, especially in childhood, became the foundation for how you all interact with the world. Many of you daughters ended up learning to adapt by prioritizing safety over authenticity. You learned to people please, to suppress your emotions, or to perfect yourselves to gain approval and avoid conflict. These coping mechanisms actually ended up becoming a part of your personality, but they aren't the whole. They aren't all of who you are. It never ends there. And you ladies, you guys know this at this point from other conversations we've had on the show. But as a reminder, trauma brain operates from that place of fear, from hypervigilance, and from survival. That's what we're talking about when we say fight, flight, freeze, fawn. Wise mind, on the other hand, is that state that we work to cultivate, where we're grounded in the present moment. It's where we're able to access both logic and emotion without letting our fears or our trauma responses dictate what we do. Finding out who we are after trauma is always going to mean spending more time in wise mind, where we can feel free and comfortable to explore our true preferences, our needs, and our desires without that accompanying fear of rejection or harm. Now, part of this healing is going to mean realizing that the person you became during trauma, whether you were that people pleaser, the perfectionist, or as you experimented briefly, the boundary pusher, it served you for survival, but it's not the real you. And this is probably going to ring true for you, Courtney, because as you shared with us, you spent some of that time living more on the edge, and then you swung into people pleasing and came to know and own that that wasn't truly you either, but that they were the adaptive parts of you. It must have felt so exposing in a way when that guy told you that you didn't seem to know who you were. No shit. You were only months or so into trying to figure out how to do healthy relationships in the first place. And you've lived so much more of your life in response to trauma than you have as your healed self. So moving through the world in a lot of ways, and Courtney, please don't take this the wrong way. I realize now as I'm thinking it through, it sounds a little condescending, and I certainly don't mean it that way. But 2 months in, post healing journey, you're more of a toddler. You're starting, you're stopping, you're catching yourself, you're falling, you're getting back up. And no one tells you, actually, now that I think of it and try to pursue this analogy, but nobody ever tells you that sometimes growth makes you look like a freaking toddler. But oftentimes, truth be told, it does. Now, you've shared how in your healing you got yourself into really fixed roles. First, you were that boundary pusher. Then, you were the people pleaser. Then, you were the journal toting, perfect trauma recovery person, taking copious notes, doing all the things, checking off the list. You put yourself in these really rigid roles. And we know you did this partly, at least, in some attempt to control your environment. And also, let's all admit for a second here, those perfectionistic impulses, they can be really hard to shake. Now, though, Courtney, what we're coming to together is we need to help you get yourself into a more curious place, one that isn't attached to the idea of a fixed outcome, because none of us are any one thing. So many different things make us who we are. So we have to give you permission to be curious, to stay curious, and we want you to stay open and curious and not just pick the first thing that comes to mind. Now, here are some things you can think about and ask yourself or journal about. However, if you have a girlfriend or someone that feels safe for you, I would really encourage you to also start exploring these ideas while you are in conversation with other people. I don't think, as I say this out loud, that I've spent enough time talking on the show here about how so much healing actually happens inside relationships with safe people. It's easy to assume that healing's an inside job, but those of you who are managing a lot of triggers, you know that most of your triggers aren't happening when you're sitting alone in a room or when you're driving alone in your car. They happen inside interactions with other people. So, relationship work is a part of the work. And these kinds of conversations are really good practice. These are the kinds of things that you could explore with a safe friend. Now, like I said, you can't journal yourselves into being your new selves, but I do have questions and guideposts that you can consider for yourself as you try to sort through your coping self from your true self. And Courtney, I'm going to do you and all of the ladies listening a solid here. For the next little while, I'm going to walk you through some things to think about. But as you heard me say at the start of the show, I also took all of these points and I made them a PDF of the journaling prompts so you can all consider them at your own time and at your own pace. But that way you don't have to worry about following along as I'm talking. You and everyone listening, you're able to grab that link for that PDF in the show notes now, and you can do it too while you're listening. It's going to help you follow along a little bit in the conversation so you don't end up getting lost in the weeds. What we're trying to do here together is nail down a bit more what lights you all up, what makes you feel alive, even when it's scary to express to other people. We want you to better come to know the parts of yourself that you suppress in order to keep other people happy or to avoid conflict. And we want you to know where you feel the most free and in touch with expressing your emotions, even when no one's watching. Because here's the thing, Courtney, part of finding your true self is going to mean letting go of that need to always feel safe. It's going to mean connecting to the things that have likely felt too vulnerable to connect to in the past. So let's dig deeper into all of this. And we're not going to nail it down in 4 questions, but I want you to start thinking about what feels effortless to you. What activities, conversations, or ways of being natural feel natural to you and feel enjoyable? Where, for example, do you lose track of time? Or where don't you feel the need to perform? One of the other things I'd be really curious about and thinking about here is, when do you feel the most alive? What moments or experiences bring out a sense of excitement, of joy, of connection to life? Is it perhaps when you're creating, when you're learning, or does it happen more often when you're connecting with other people? You might spend some time too thinking about what beliefs or habits perhaps you've outgrown. I'd be curious too if perhaps there might be old patterns that you used to have, ways of thinking or behaving that no longer feel aligned with who you feel like you are right now or who you feel like you might be becoming. Where do you start to notice tension between your old self and the person you're evolving into? And what parts of yourself did you have to hide in order to feel safe? Or do you currently have to hide in order to feel safe? Now, in your childhood or your past relationships, I'd look at a little bit, what were the aspects of your personality that you had to suppress in order to avoid conflict, rejection, or criticism? What would you do if you weren't afraid of judgment? If you weren't worried about how others might perceive you? Would you take risks? Would you take different risks? And what truth might you start to speak? What choices might you make differently? So often, when I'm doing this work with my clients, we learn more about who they are by paying attention to where they've placed sensors in their lives, where they don't say what they think, where they don't do what they want to do, and where they play small or where they hold themselves back. I would spend some time too reflecting on what you have learned from your past relationships. Oftentimes, when your past is filled with toxic relationships, it's easy to tell yourself a story that everything was a mistake. And that sometimes leads to a tendency to just want to erase everything and start over. But if you can, I'd really encourage you to just get curious instead. How have your relationships reflected for you both your strengths and your areas for growth? What patterns or dynamics have you seen yourself repeating? And what might these patterns say about how you see yourself or how perhaps you've seen yourself in the past? Part of knowing who we are, we know this, right? You heard me say this at the beginning of the show, but it comes down to values. After all, that's when you're doing the healing work, that's how we set boundaries with other people. And we've all been together for plenty of these conversations now, but also what are your values that are currently guiding your decisions in life? And can you do a check in with yourself on where you might be living or where you might have lived outside of alignment of those values? Courtney, you mentioned that you feel more connected to your feelings when you're alone. And that's a really good observation. And it's good information for you as you start to get to know yourself more. What are the differences you're observing in how you think and how you feel and how you act when you're alone versus when you find yourself with other people? I'd be a little curious too here about what you love to talk about, even though no one else might be interested. Do you have topics or passions that you could just talk about endlessly? Sometimes not knowing ourselves is a reflection back to us that we actually need more boundaries in our lives. Sometimes we realize we're censoring ourselves or we're doing that whole holding ourselves back thing and holding our true selves back because we're trying to ward off our own authenticity. Are there boundaries that you would be able to set in your life today that would allow you to create more space for your true self, who you want to be, to emerge? Now, please just allow me to pause the podcast for a second in this conversation to allow the eyes to roll. I know you guys are tired of hearing me talk about this. And even as I say it out loud, I'm like, oh my God, I can hear the collective groan coming my way. But listening to your body, hearing that direction probably starts to sound really tedious after you've listened to me say it week after week. But getting to know yourselves without also listening to your bodies is going to end up being fruitless because our bodies tell us so much. And if we don't listen to them, there's going to be a giant disconnect at some point. So I want you to think about a time when you have felt truly authentic, when you're in that state, expressing your true self. Do you feel energized? Do you feel perhaps relaxed, grounded, more open? Once you know what it feels like in your body when you feel like you're being your authentic self, you're going to be able to use those feelings to guide you toward more authentic living going forward. Because you see, ladies, our bodies, they don't just ward us away from danger. They can also lead us to places where we do feel more ourselves, where we feel more in our own skin. And we have to keep turning some of your harder moments inside out so we can learn more about you. So, how do you react when you're in conflict or when you're in tension? When you're faced with a disagreement or emotional discomfort, do you find yourself shutting down? Do you over explain? I'm raising my hand on that one. I am an over explainer. Or do you retreat into people pleasing? What would it look like if you were to stay true to yourself in those moments? I might also start to explore for yourself a little bit, Courtney, if you are perhaps avoiding any emotions. Trauma work, we know this. It comes with so much intense anger, sadness, and shame. And you have already worked through so very much of that. So it is normal and natural that once you get out from under all of that, once you finally feel regulated and calm, and once you feel more balanced, of course you might want to avoid disrupting that apple cart. You just got all the apples into the cart after all, right? So if you're avoiding things that are hard, that maybe make you feel sad or make you feel mad, you're also avoiding parts of yourself. So as you reflect on your relationship, you might find that you finally had something good in your life. You just wanted it to stay good for a while without any trauma drama. So you might have pushed other harder parts of yourself aside. So do that gut check in. What emotions might you be avoiding? Are there perhaps emotions like anger, sadness, or joy that feel a little bit too vulnerable or uncomfortable for you to express? What stories have you told yourself about why you can't or shouldn't feel those things? Courtney, I have to tell you too, I'm a little bit curious here about the fears that you might be holding in your body. Do you perhaps hold any fears about showing or expressing your true self? Do you carry perhaps fears about being vulnerable or authentic with other people? You might be good with you. And honestly, reading your letter, it seems like you are. But perhaps you don't feel as good with others. Not because they're toxic, like we hear so often, but more because it's simply untested waters for you. You've never tried expressing yourself in some of these ways to some of these people. So you might not be sure how to actually go about doing that. And it is worth checking in on this with yourself because you might be holding fears of failure, of rejection, or abandonment. And those are the kinds of things that end up censoring us. We hold back in places where we might encounter those things. And then in holding back, it makes it so you guys don't know who you are anymore because you aren't expressing what you're thinking or feeling. And you're not allowing that version of you to take up space, and when you're not allowing that version of you to take up space, you don't get to know her very much. And getting to know yourself, Courtney, it's also going to mean the opposite. It's also going to mean getting to know what brings you peace, what brings you contentment. And oftentimes, though, what happens for a lot of you daughters is you simply haven't had enough moments of pleasure, of safety, or happiness to know them when you actually see them. Moments like that are so hard fought for you guys. They're so hard won. And sometimes they feel so fleeting and it feels like you can't grab onto them tight enough. This ends up being why when people ask you what you like, you don't always know because anything not miserable is actually literally okay with all of you. So your guy, he read this as not having an opinion, as not knowing who you are. He likely didn't know, and you likely weren't able to connect to the idea that if he asked you about Chinese versus Mexican food, you likely literally couldn't give two fucks because everything with him was already better than you had had before him. So you actually were totally fine with either Chinese or Mexican food because you were just happy and you were enjoying the fact that the actual debate of Chinese versus Mexican food was the biggest debate you were having. That must have felt like such sweet relief, and you must have felt so much gratitude. But that kind of gratitude for something that might seem so small and insignificant to other people, it would feel foreign to him. So you ended up in a disconnect, I imagine. And that is likely what he needed to know, not what you actually liked, but the way that disconnect happens makes sense to me because he needs to know that, like, you really don't care about what you like because you're just enjoying easy interaction, easy relationship building. That being said, though, it is worth spending some time reflecting on the times when you have felt secure in your body, when you have felt calm, when you have felt aligned and free of any kind of external pressure. What do you learn from examples like that about who you are and what you need to thrive? Then, Courtney, we've got to get you practicing authenticity. And we've got to get you okay with the idea that authenticity is, in fact, something you need to practice. We buy into the idea, all of you listening, we buy into the idea that we have to practice boundary setting. We have to practice communication. But then we think we're just supposed to be ourselves after a lifetime of being anything but ourselves. That's why it ends up feeling like you somehow missed something or that you have this blind spot. But, Courtney, I don't think that's what happened to you. I think you just need some practice, my friend. So let's take a second here. What are small ways that you might be able to start practicing vulnerability? Because, my friends, journal prompts, like they give you information, right? If you do these journals, if you find your ways to that little PDF and you do the work and you answer the questions, you then have to go and take action based on what you learn and write down. Nothing's going to change in the writing, it changes in the doing. Okay, off my soapbox. What are small, manageable steps that you can start to take to express your true self more authentically in all of your relationships? This might mean sharing an unfiltered opinion. It might mean saying no. More than likely, it's going to mean taking opportunities to name how you're feeling, even if showing your feelings feels a little bit unnatural. It's also going to be worth asking yourself about the risks you're willing to take in order to be more authentic. After all, part of why this has been so hard for all of you is that you have been working so hard to feel safe that you haven't then given yourselves permission to take many risks. Where in your life can you take a chance? Might it be by speaking up, setting a boundary? Maybe it's time to pursue something that you've censored yourself from trying, something that feels aligned with who you are or who you think you might be. What we're trying to do here, Courtney, and all of you listening, is get you more in alignment with your true self. So we got to poke around a bit to see what we see. And a good way to do this is like a Heather classic question. My clients listening are going to be like, yep, I've gotten this one a time or two. Here goes. If you were already the woman you wanted to be and the life, love, and work you wanted to have, what would you be doing right now? How would your relationships feel? What might they look like? How might your work change, for example? Would your daily routines change, your hobbies, the things you do to take care of yourself? And what might you need to let go of to be able to better connect to and access that part of your life? We often do get cues from the places where we don't have to think, from situations, places, people where it's just easy and we're just ourselves without realizing we're ourselves. So it's important to take a second and just think and sit with yourself for a moment. Are there people in your life that feel like that? What might you need to do to cultivate more relationships like that in your life? What do people do or how do they act that allows you to be more free and feel more open? Okay. And Courtney is still with me. This is a lot. This next one, though, it's a biggie. It's a big one for all of you, but it is a rock solid question to get you focused on who you are, who you want to be, and what still needs to change in order to be her. What would your life look like if you were your own best friend? Now, admittedly, when I started this conversation with you, Courtney, I didn't think I was creating this entire mini course on learning yourself after trauma, but that's in fact what seems to be happening here. So let's just take a second together. Let's pause. Take a big old breath. I want you to know that all of these prompts are things to think about, things to consider with safe people, and things to practice as you feel comfortable doing so. This doesn't mean you need to pause on your own life, on living, or on dating until you figure all of this out, until you have all of the answers to all of the questions. These are questions that I would consider and encourage you to allow to be open ended. Please print them out, answer them a little bit at a time, stay curious, allow yourself to answer one way on a Monday and then maybe end up having a different answer on a Tuesday, because that's what happens when we're getting to know ourselves. Developing our true selves, it's never going to happen in a straight line. There's no steps and stages. So I want you to remember too for a second that with this guy, you did the very best you could with the tools you had at the time. And going forward, you're going to keep doing the very best you can with the tools and knowledge you have at the time. That's all we can ask of ourselves, Courtney. That is all we can ask of ourselves. But we need to get you practicing these things. We can't have it all in your head as this academic exercise or as like the student of the week fully completed journal. Because if it's only written down and you don't do anything with what you write down, you're not doing the work. Huh. Apparently, I didn't get off that soapbox, ladies. Part of what I'm hoping for from this conversation is, that it helps you with integration. Now, integration, it is admittedly a psychobabble word, and I know it sounds super clinical, but this is what we're talking about. Integration is that process of bringing together all of these parts of who you are, your emotions, your thoughts, your experiences, so that you can live as your authentic self instead of feeling fragmented or disconnected. Integration means blending your past experiences with your present reality in a way that honors your true self, that honors who you are, rather than being controlled by those old survival patterns. For you daughters, we know this now, right? Your childhood often meant hiding the parts of yourselves to keep the peace, to seek approval, to manage those unpredictable moments and unpredictable emotions that your moms would create. And Courtney, you're showing us how that means it can feel like you have multiple versions of yourself, right? The person you are when you're alone, the person you are when you're with your mom, the person you might be when you're with other people. And you spoke of how you feel sometimes like you operate from your head. And that is, it's really normal, honestly. And it's common to do that after healing. And in some ways, we have to anticipate it that it's going to still happen for a little while yet. But I don't think people give enough attention. And you daughters certainly don't get enough of a big heads up about it. But Integration is going to look like no longer being in survival mode. Instead of constantly trying to protect yourself from criticism or from disapproval, you're going to start to learn to trust your feelings and your choices without that immediate fear of backlash. Integration, when you're really starting to integrate the work you've been doing, it means you're recognizing and you're honoring all of the parts of you rather than rejecting the parts of yourself that you had to hide to please your mother, like your anger, your vulnerability, or your individuality. You're acknowledging all of those parts of you as valuable, and you're granting them the space in your life to exist. And part of integration, too, is what you heard me say in 50 million different ways in these journaling prompts, but we're trying to get you to express your true thoughts and your true feelings, to get you to stop filtering or performing to meet what you imagine other people's expectations of you might be, and to get you to start expressing yourself more openly, even if it feels a little bit risky. It might mean, for example, saying what you really think in a moment or setting boundaries even when it's hard. Feeling more whole is basically what we're working for here, right? Because we're trying to get to know yourself. And if you know yourself, you're going to be feeling more whole. So instead of feeling like you're being different people with different situations, in some situations, maybe you think you have to be polite. In other situations, perhaps you think you have to be the tough one, the quiet one, or the overly accommodating one. You want to learn to be able to bring that core version of yourself into all these other areas of your life. And you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and respect. Know that, believe it, own it, because when you start to integrate, you live with less self doubt. You become more confident in your decisions and your values and trusting your opinions over other people's opinions or other people's judgments. And you begin to know and trust what's right for you rather than constantly seeking out that external validation from other people. This is what we mean by practicing. So, for example, when you're around your mom or another difficult, toxic person, instead of falling into old patterns of people pleasing or minimizing your needs or seeking approval, you might set boundaries. You might speak up for yourself, even if she reacts negatively. You've likely come to know that her feelings aren't your responsibility at this point, and thanks to integration, you are going to be able to start to act as if that's so. And it's going to look differently too, Courtney, in your relationship with other people. You're going to stop feeling like you need to be the caretaker or the good girl who always puts other people first. You begin to prioritize your own needs and your own feelings, and then you let people see who you really are, not just the version of you that's willing to keep the peace. And integration shows up in decision making. So instead of second guessing yourself or asking reassurance from other people, you start to trust your inner voice. You make choices based on what feels right for you, even if it happens to be different from what you were taught or from perhaps from what others expect. Integration's about beginning to own your own identity. Integration helps you break free from old roles you had to play in your relationship with your mom and honestly with other people too. You start to feel more yourself because you're more grounded in who you truly are. Something you really, honestly, Courtney, have going for yourself here is that you feel safe with yourself now. I can hear it in your letter. I was really impressed by that about you. So, we want to help you start to feel safe with other people too by letting them see your emotions, your opinions, and any quirks you might have. before you start filtering them out. And like I said at the start of the show, it's a good idea to start practicing and sharing more of yourself with a safe person. It might mean showing up as your whole self in a single conversation. Or maybe it means letting your silly self play out with other people without holding yourself back. I don't know if you listened, Courtney, a couple of weeks ago when I told a listener tits up. I went back and forth on that so many times because I was like, "Oh my god, what are people gonna think of me? I can't believe I said that on a podcast, and can I really get away with this?" And I realized that if it was in real life and nobody else was listening but somebody in the room with me, that's what I would have said. So I said it and I kept it. Showing up authentically in these smaller ways, like it gives you confidence to show up in some of the bigger ones. And I can tell you, even though I shook my head at the tits up comment, it ended up being true. In future episodes since I've recorded that, I've said to myself, "Hey, like, you lived to tell the tale. You said that wild and crazy thing a couple of weeks ago and you didn't die. So maybe you can have this conversation too." You want to embrace yourself. You want to get to know yourself. When people pleasing and perfectionism starts to show up and rear its ugly head again, we want to call it out. We want to squash it. You're going to feel vulnerable in moments of conflict or when you're feeling emotionally exposed a little bit. So, in those moments, Courtney, you're going to remind yourself that people pleasing and perfectionism did serve you in the past, but you don't need them anymore. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to take a second to just reassure you a little bit. I'm not asking any of you to just put yourselves naked in the middle of Times Square and say, "Here I am, world, take your best shot." I am not asking for, nor am I encouraging 100% vulnerability 100% of the time. I'm always going to want all of you to work on balance. I'm always going to want you ladies to be vulnerable and safe. We want you risking being open while maintaining boundaries. Of course, we know this. It's going to make you uncomfortable, but it's okay too to lean into that discomfort just a bit. Remind yourselves here, keeping yourself fully safe is actually what kept you from knowing yourself. So we want you to know, own, and accept that doing this part of the work is going to make you uncomfortable. We have to get you to lean into that discomfort while setting the limits that you need in order to keep continuing to be open. Figuring out who you are after trauma and integrating who you are after trauma is a process of gradually allowing more of who you really are to emerge in your everyday interactions. It's about giving yourself permission to show up in imperfect, messy ways while trusting that you're still worthy of love and of connection. It means embracing your feelings in real time, connecting with others from the heart instead of the head. And it means letting go of those old survival patterns that no longer serve you. Now, Courtney, whew, all right, here. You've helped me start one hell of a conversation. And honestly, I want to thank you for your vulnerability here. As you've heard me just describe, it is really good practice for you. And I am really, really proud of you. For all of you listening, thanks for being with us in this conversation. Figuring out who you are, integrating that with how you move through the world, well, those are big, big things. Let me remind all of you too, especially you people pleasers, that this is a process that takes time. It takes patience and it takes self compassion as you bring all these pieces of yourselves together. So, perfectionism needs to be put by the wayside. Don't forget now, if you haven't grabbed it already while you're still listening to me yammer on here, I did create a PDF of those journaling prompts for you to dive into deeper. You're going to find a link for it in the show notes. And if you're ready for more support, I really do invite you to join us on Tuesday group. We explore topics like this as a community, and we're learning to heal together. You're going to be able to find a link for that in the show notes too. We'd love to have you and keep talking about this. All of you women are in this community of women around the world who are in this and doing this work with you. And I, for sure, most definitely am in it with you too. Bye for now. I do hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you have a question you'd like me to consider for the show, please do email me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. You are always welcome to share your story or questions by recording yourself using the voice app on your phone. For best recording quality, please do record directly into your phone without using headphones or Bluetooth speakers. We're building an incredible community as well over on Instagram, and I'd love to see you over there too. You can find us at Daughters NPD. Lastly, if you love what you've been hearing here on Mayhem and have found the show helpful in your own trauma recovery, please do consider becoming a Mother Mayhem sponsor by purchasing simple scripts for saying hard things. It's a resource I created that provides the right words for the hard conversations, and it covers life, love, and work. You'll find a link for that in the show notes. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, please do share the show with her. Your reviews and social shares help spread the word, and I hope you'll consider doing so. Special thanks to Heather Clark for editing the show. She's in my head and knows what I meant to say when the words come out backwards. Thanks so much for your time today. As always, I'm in it with you. Bye for now.